In just 41 seconds, one of Hollywood's toughest actors went from calm and collected to absolutely furious, unleashing a verbal takedown so brutal that Joy Behar's face went pale. What started as a simple question about his latest film turned into an explosive battle that ended with Tom Hardy storming off the set while cameras were still rolling. This wasn't just another celebrity disagreement. This was a complete meltdown that exposed everything wrong with how some hosts treat their guests. Before we dive into this absolute chaos, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that reveal who these people really are behind the cameras. The atmosphere on set last night was already tense before Tom Hardy even walked out. The crew members were whispering amongst themselves, and you could feel something was about to go wrong. Hardy came onto the stage wearing his usual leather jacket and boots, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He shook hands with the hosts, gave a quick wave to the audience, and sat down in the guest chair. Joy Behar was sitting at the table with that look on her face, the one she gets when she thinks she's about to make someone squirm. The other hosts were there too, but this story is really about what went down between Joy and Tom. Joy started off with what seemed like a normal question about his new movie, some action thriller, where he plays a former soldier. Tom answered politely, talking about the physical preparation and the stunts he did himself. He was being professional, giving good answers, making the audience laugh a few times. Everything seemed fine at first, but then Joy's tone shifted. She leaned forward with this smirk and said something like, "So Tom, a lot of people are saying that action movies are just mindless violence. Don't you think you're contributing to a culture that glorifies aggression?" Tom's expression changed immediately. His jaw tightened, and he sat up straighter in his chair. "That's quite a statement," he said slowly. "Are you asking me a question, or are you making an accusation?" The audience went quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Joy laughed it off like she always does when she realizes she might have pushed too far, but she didn't back down. "I'm just saying what people are thinking," she replied. "These movies, they're all the same. Explosions, fights, tough guys solving problems with their fists. What message does that send?" Tom took a deep breath, and you could see him trying to stay calm. "With respect, Joy, you clearly haven't watched the film," he said. "The story is actually about a man dealing with trauma, trying to reintegrate into society after war. The action is there, yes, but it's not glorified. It shows the cost of violence, the damage it does to people." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, that's what they all say. But at the end of the day, you're still punching people and shooting guns on screen. Young kids watch these movies." That's when things started to really heat up. Tom leaned forward and his voice got firmer. "Young kids watch a lot of things, Joy. They watch talk shows too, where hosts interrupt their guests, talk over them, and make assumptions without doing their research. What message does that send?" A few people in the audience gasped. One of the other hosts tried to jump in and change the subject, but Joy wasn't having it. Her face was getting red, and you could tell she was pissed off. "Excuse me?" Joy said, her voice getting louder. "I've been doing this show for years. I think I know how to conduct an interview." Tom didn't back down. "Do you, though? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you invited me here just to lecture me about my career choices. You haven't asked me anything genuine about the work, the story we're trying to tell, or the people I worked with. You just want to make some political point." The tension was insane at this point. The other hosts were looking at each other nervously, not sure if they should intervene. The audience was completely silent, watching this unfold like a car crash. Joy's face was now fully flushed and she pointed her finger at Tom. "I don't need a lecture from you about how to do my job," she snapped. "You come on this show and you should expect to answer tough questions. That's what we do here." Tom let out this cold laugh. "Tough questions? Is that what you call that? A tough question would require you to actually know something about the subject. You're not asking tough questions, you're just being rude." The word rude seemed to really set Joy off. She slammed her hand on the table and the sound echoed through the studio. "How dare you call me rude? You're sitting on my show, promoted by my platform, and you have the nerve to insult me?" "Your show?" Tom shot back. "This isn't your kingdom, Joy. It's a talk show. And a good talk show would treat guests with basic respect. Joy was practically shouting now. Respect? You want respect? Maybe you should show some respect for the concerns people have about the violent garbage you put out into the world. The other hosts were trying desperately to calm things down, one of them saying something like, "Let's all take a breath here." But neither Tom nor Joy were listening. Tom stood up from his chair, and the whole studio seemed to freeze. "You know what your problem is, Joy," he said, his voice lower but somehow more intense. "You think because you have a microphone and a studio audience, that makes you right, that makes you important. But really, you're just someone who's gotten comfortable being mean and calling it honest talk." The audience was completely shocked. Some people were covering their mouths. Others were just staring with wide eyes. Joy stood up too, which was a mistake, because now it really looked like a confrontation. "Get out," she said. "Get the hell off my stage." Tom laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Gladly. I've dealt with better manners in a pub fight." He started to walk toward the exit, but Joy couldn't let it go. She kept talking, her voice following him across the stage. "That's right. Run away. Can't handle a real conversation, can you?" Tom stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly and walked back toward the table, and for a second everyone thought he might actually do something crazy. But instead, he just looked at Joy with this expression of complete disgust. "A real conversation requires two people who are willing to listen," he said quietly, but the microphones picked up every word. "You don't want a conversation. You want to preach. You want to feel superior. And you know what? I feel sorry for you." That line about feeling sorry for her was the final straw. Joy completely lost it. "You feel sorry for me? You're an actor. You play pretend for a living. You get paid millions to look tough on camera, and you think you can come here and judge me?" Tom shook his head. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. He looked at the camera directly and said, "To anyone watching who was looking forward to this interview, I apologize. I thought this would be a chance to talk about the work, but clearly that's not what this show is about." Joy was yelling now, actually yelling. "That's right. Blame everyone else. Typical Hollywood ego. You think you're better than everyone." Tom didn't respond. He just started walking off the stage again. One of the producers came running out, trying to stop him, probably thinking about the disaster this was turning into. But Tom brushed past him. You could hear Joy in the background still ranting, saying something about good riddance and can't handle the heat. As Tom reached the exit on the side of the stage, he paused one more time. Without turning around, he said loud enough for the microphones to catch, "The problem with people like you, Joy, is that you mistake cruelty for courage. You think tearing people down makes you strong. It doesn't. It just makes you cruel." Then he pushed through the door and was gone. The studio was in absolute chaos. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or sit in silence. Some people were actually booing, though it wasn't clear if they were booing Tom for leaving or booing Joy for how she'd handled it. The other hosts were scrambling, trying to figure out what to say. One of them suggested going to commercial break, but Joy was still standing there, her face bright red, looking like she wanted to throw something. "Fine!" Joy shouted to the empty stage where Tom had been standing moments before. "We don't need people like him anyway. Coming on here with that attitude." But her voice was shaking, and you could tell she knew this had gone too far. One of the other hosts gently touched her arm and whispered something, probably telling her to sit down and calm down. The camera operators didn't know what to do. Do they keep filming? Do they cut away? The whole thing was a mess. Eventually, they did cut to commercial, but not before the cameras caught Joy sitting back down heavily in her chair, looking furious, but also maybe a little bit worried. Because here's the thing about confrontations like this. They don't just disappear. They get replayed, analyzed, turned into clips that spread everywhere. And in this case, Tom Hardy had walked off looking like the reasonable one, while Joy looked like she'd completely lost control. What makes this whole situation even worse for Joy is that Tom wasn't wrong about any of it. He had come on the show to promote his film, to talk about the story and the work that went into it. Instead, he got ambushed with accusations about his career and the type of movies he makes. And when he defended himself, when he tried to have an actual conversation, Joy shut him down and made it personal. She attacked him instead of listening to what he was saying. The other hosts were clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing. You could see it on their faces throughout the confrontation. They knew Joy had crossed a line, but they also knew they couldn't really step in without making it worse. So they sat there, looking worried, occasionally trying to interject, but mostly just watching this train wreck happen in real time. The audience was split too. Some of them probably agreed with Joy's initial point about action movies, but even they seemed shocked by how aggressive she got. Think about what actually happened here. A guest came on the show, answered questions politely, and then pushed back when those questions turned into attacks. That's not disrespectful. That's standing up for yourself. But Joy treated it like it was the worst thing anyone had ever done to her. She acted like Tom challenging her perspective was the same as insulting her entire existence. That kind of reaction tells you everything you need to know about how she views these interviews. She doesn't want discussions. She wants agreement. Tom Hardy is not known for being difficult in interviews. He's actually usually pretty charming and funny when he's on talk shows. He tells good stories, he's humble about his work, and he connects with audiences. So for him to get this angry, this quickly, Joy must have really pushed him. And from what we saw, she absolutely did. She came at him with an agenda from the start, barely letting him talk about his actual film before launching into criticism. The way Joy reacted when Tom stood up was telling too. She immediately went on the defensive, started shouting, and told him to get out. She couldn't handle being challenged. She couldn't handle someone pointing out that maybe her approach wasn't as brilliant as she thought. Instead of taking a breath, instead of trying to reset the conversation, she escalated it. She made it personal. She attacked his career, his character, everything she could think of. And Tom's final comments as he left were perfect. That line about mistaking cruelty for courage, that summed up the entire confrontation. Because that's exactly what Joy had done. She thought she was being brave by going after him, by asking tough questions. But really, she was just being mean. She was using her position as host to bully a guest, and when that guest didn't take it, she lost her mind. The moment when Tom looked directly at the camera and apologized to the viewers was brilliant too. He understood that people had tuned in wanting to hear about his movie, wanting to hear interesting stories from the set, wanting to be entertained. Instead, they got a fight, and he acknowledged that. He took responsibility for his part in it, even though anyone watching could see that Joy had started the whole thing. What's interesting is that Tom never raised his voice to the level Joy did. Even when he was clearly angry, even when he was calling her out, he stayed relatively controlled. He made his points firmly, but he didn't scream. He didn't slam tables. He didn't point fingers in her face. Joy did all of those things. Joy was the one who lost control. Yet she was acting like Tom was the problem, like he was the one being unreasonable. The other thing worth noting is that Tom gave Joy multiple chances to back off. When she first made the comment about action movies being mindless violence, he could have exploded right then. But he didn't. He asked if she was making an accusation. He explained the actual themes of his film. He tried to engage with her seriously. It was only when she kept pushing, kept dismissing everything he said, that he started pushing back harder. Joy's comment about young kids watching these movies was particularly ridiculous when you think about it. Because Tom was right. Young kids watch a lot of things, including talk shows where adults yell at each other. If she's so concerned about what messages young people are receiving, maybe she should look at the example she's setting. Maybe she should consider that treating people badly on television might be just as harmful as any action movie. The accusation that Tom was running away when he first tried to leave was absurd too. He wasn't running. He was refusing to participate in something that had become toxic. That's not cowardice. That's self-respect. But Joy couldn't see it that way. She had to frame it as him being weak, being unable to handle her tough questions. Because admitting that she had driven him away would mean admitting that she had messed up. When Tom came back after Joy's comment about running away, you could see how much restraint he was showing. He could have said so many worse things. He could have really torn into her, but instead, he kept it focused on the real issue. Her inability to have a respectful conversation. He didn't attack her looks, her age, her background, or anything personal that would have been cruel. He attacked her behavior, her approach, her attitude. That's fair game. The line about feeling sorry for her clearly struck a nerve. Nobody wants to be pitied, especially not someone like Joy who prides herself on being tough and outspoken. But Tom's pity was genuine. You could hear it in his voice. He wasn't saying it to be mean. He was saying it because it's actually kind of sad to watch someone be so defensive, so unable to accept criticism, so wrapped up in their own perspective that they can't see how they're treating others. Joy's response to that pity was to attack Tom's career, calling him someone who plays pretend for a living. Which is funny because what does she think she does? She sits at a table and talks. That's her job. It's not more noble or important than being an actor. Both are forms of entertainment. Both serve a purpose. But she had to try to diminish what he does to make herself feel superior. It didn't work, it just made her look petty. The fact that Tom apologized to the viewers before leaving showed real class. He could have just stormed off in anger and left it at that. But he thought about the people watching at home, who had been excited to see him on the show. He acknowledged their disappointment. That's the kind of thing that makes people respect you. Meanwhile, Joy was yelling good riddance, like a child throwing a tantrum. The producer trying to stop Tom from leaving was a pointless effort. Once someone has decided they're done with a situation like that, they're done. You can't force someone to stay and continue being disrespected. The producer probably knew the show was about to face serious backlash for this, and he was hoping maybe Tom would cool down and come back out. But that was never going to happen. Tom had made his decision and he stuck with it. Joy's continued ranting after Tom left showed that she still didn't get it. She was still trying to justify her behavior, still trying to make it seem like Tom was the problem. We don't need people like him anyway? Yes, actually, you do. You need guests who are willing to come on your show and be interviewed. And when you treat those guests like garbage, word gets around. Other celebrities hear about it. They remember it. They decline future invitations. The other hosts whispering to Joy, trying to calm her down, must have been an awkward position to be in. Because, what do you say? Hey, you just blew up at one of the biggest movie stars in the world on live television? They were probably torn between supporting their colleague and recognizing that this was a disaster. The fact that they pushed for a commercial break shows they knew they needed to stop the bleeding. That shot of Joy sitting back down, looking furious but worried, will probably become iconic. Because that's the moment when reality started to sink in for her. That's when she probably started thinking about how this was going to play in the media, what people were going to say, whether this would affect the show. All of that bluster and anger couldn't hide the fact that she knew this had gone badly. The silence from the audience at various points during the confrontation was deafening. Talk show audiences usually react to everything. They laugh, they applaud, they gasp. But during this fight, they often just went quiet. That's because they didn't know whose side to be on. Or maybe they knew but didn't want to go against the host. When people don't know how to react to something, when something is so uncomfortable that normal responses don't fit, that's when you get silence. Tom's body language throughout this whole thing was interesting to watch. When he first sat down, he was open and relaxed. As Joy started attacking, he closed off, arms crossed, jaw tight, posture defensive. When he stood up, he was asserting himself, taking back control. And when he walked away, he didn't look back except for those final comments. That's someone who had made a decision and wasn't second-guessing it. Joy's body language told a different story. She started confident, even smug. As Tom pushed back, she got more aggressive, leaning forward, pointing, raising her voice. When he stood to leave, she stood too, matching his energy. But that final shot of her sitting down showed defeat. Her shoulders slumped. Her face was still red. She looked drained. That's what happens when you pick a fight and realize you've lost. The commercial break must have been chaos behind the scenes. Producers scrambling, trying to figure out how to handle the rest of the show. Should they address what just happened? Should they ignore it and move on? Should they try to get Tom to come back? Every option probably seemed bad, because there was no good way to spin this. There was no way to make it look like anything other than what it was. A host attacking a guest until he left. When you think about why this confrontation happened, it really comes down to respect. Tom felt disrespected by Joy's questions and her dismissive attitude. Joy felt disrespected when Tom challenged her. But here's the difference. Tom was a guest who deserved courtesy and good faith. Joy was a host who has a responsibility to make guests feel welcome while still asking meaningful questions. She failed at that responsibility. He simply stood up for himself. The whole thing could have been avoided if Joy had approached the conversation differently. She could have asked about the themes of violence in action movies in a curious way, actually interested in Tom's perspective. She could have acknowledged the work that goes into making these films while still exploring their cultural impact. Instead, she went straight to accusation and judgment. That set the tone for everything that followed. Tom's comment about Joy thinking she's important because she has a microphone was harsh but accurate. It's easy to confuse having a platform with having wisdom. It's easy to think that because people listen to you, you must be right. But a platform is just a platform. It's what you do with it that matters. And what Joy did with hers last night was waste an opportunity to have an interesting conversation with a talented actor. The fact that some audience members were booing at the end shows how divided people were about what had happened. Some probably thought Tom was disrespectful for walking out. Others probably thought Joy got what she deserved. But the ones who were paying attention, who watched the whole thing unfold, could see that Joy had created this situation. She had turned what should have been a fun interview into a battlefield. What's sad is that this didn't have to be how things went. Tom Hardy has great stories. He's worked with amazing directors. He does a lot of charity work. He's passionate about his craft. Any of those things could have been the focus of the interview. Instead, Joy decided to use her time with him to push her own opinions about action movies. And when he didn't just accept those opinions, she attacked him personally. The way Tom said this was a mistake before leaving for good was filled with regret. Not regret for standing up for himself, but regret for agreeing to come on the show in the first place. That's a terrible feeling for a host to give a guest. When someone leaves your show wishing they had never come, you've failed at the most basic level. Guests should leave feeling heard, feeling like they had a good conversation, maybe even feeling challenged, but in a productive way. Tom left feeling ambushed and disrespected. Joy's final rant about Hollywood egos was projection at its finest. She was the one who couldn't handle being challenged. She was the one whose ego was so fragile that a guest disagreeing with her sent her into a rage. Tom's ego wasn't the problem. He was perfectly willing to have a discussion. He just wasn't willing to be lectured and insulted. There's a big difference. The image of Tom pushing through that exit door and disappearing will stick with people. Because it wasn't a dramatic flounce or a show for the cameras. It was just a person deciding they had had enough and removing themselves from a toxic situation. That's actually very mature. It's easy to stay and keep fighting, to escalate things further. It's harder to recognize when something isn't worth your time anymore and walk away with your dignity intact. Back at the table, Joy had to figure out how to proceed with the rest of the show. How do you go to the next segment after something like that? How do you pretend everything is fine? The answer is, you can't really. The energy in the studio was probably terrible for the rest of the taping. The audience was probably uncomfortable. The other hosts were probably on edge. All because of one confrontation that didn't need to happen. The thing about talk shows is that they're supposed to be entertaining, but not because of real conflict. They're supposed to be fun, interesting, maybe a little provocative, but always respectful. When real anger enters the equation, when a guest and host genuinely can't stand each other, it stops being entertainment and starts being uncomfortable to watch. That's what happened last night. It crossed from good television to yikes, this is awful. Tom Hardy is going to be fine after this. He's a huge star with a loyal fan base. Most people who see clips of this confrontation will probably side with him. They'll see someone who tried to be professional and was met with hostility. They'll respect him for not backing down and for leaving when the situation became untenable. His reputation, if anything, probably got better because of how he handled this. Joy, on the other hand, has a problem. This kind of confrontation feeds into existing criticisms of her style. People who already think she's too aggressive will point to this as proof. People who defend her will have a hard time explaining why she escalated things so dramatically. And future guests might think twice before agreeing to come on the show, wondering if they'll get the same treatment. The producers of the show are probably having a very long meeting today about what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. But the truth is, you can't really prevent these things when one person is determined to pick a fight. The only solution is to have hosts who understand the difference between asking tough questions and being confrontational for the sake of it. Joy either doesn't understand that difference or doesn't care. What makes this whole situation particularly frustrating is that it didn't serve anyone. Joy didn't get a good interview out of it. Tom didn't get to promote his film properly. The viewers didn't get the entertaining conversation they tuned in for. The show looks bad. Everyone lost. And for what? So Joy could make a point about action movies that she could have made in 100 different ways that wouldn't have involved insulting her guest? The moment when Tom walked back toward the table after Joy called him a coward, everyone in that studio must have held their breath, because it could have gotten physical. Not that Tom would have actually done anything, but the energy was there. The tension was that high, and that's dangerous. That's a sign that things have gone way, way too far. Talk shows should never reach that point where physical confrontation even seems like a possibility. Tom's restraint in that moment was remarkable. He came back, he made his point about what real conversation requires. He told Joy he felt sorry for her, and then he left. No screaming, no threats, no insults beyond the ones necessary to make his point. He could have been so much meaner. He could have said things that would have really hurt, but he kept it focused, and then he got out. That's emotional intelligence that Joy clearly doesn't have. The fact that one of the other hosts tried to change the subject early in the confrontation shows that they saw where this was heading. They tried to redirect before it got too heated, but Joy wouldn't let it go. She kept pushing. She kept attacking. She made it impossible for anyone to save the situation. At a certain point, all the other hosts could do was sit there and watch it burn. Joy, slamming her hand on the table, was such an overreaction. Tom had just called her rude, which, in the context of what was happening, was a pretty mild criticism. She had been rude. She had dismissed his work, interrupted him, and refused to engage with what he was actually saying. Calling that behavior rude was accurate, but she reacted like he had said something unforgivable. That kind of overreaction suggests someone who can't handle any criticism at all. The question is whether Joy will learn anything from this. Will she watch the footage back and recognize that she handled it badly? Will she understand that she pushed too hard and turned an interview into a fight? Or will she double down, insisting that she was just doing her job and Tom was too sensitive? Based on her behavior during the confrontation, doubling down seems more likely. But we'll see. For Tom Hardy, walking off that set must have been both frustrating and liberating. Frustrating because he didn't get to do what he came there to do. Liberating because he stood up for himself and refused to be treated badly. There's power in walking away from situations that don't serve you. There's strength in saying, I don't have to put up with this, and following through. The lasting impact of this confrontation will probably be felt more by the show than by Tom. His next interview somewhere else will probably reference what happened, and he'll give his side of the story calmly and reasonably. But the show has to deal with the fact that they hosted one of Hollywood's biggest stars and managed to drive him off the set in under an hour. That's not a good look. That's not something you can easily recover from. In the end, what we witnessed last night was a perfect example of what happens when ego overtakes professionalism. Joy's ego couldn't handle being challenged. She couldn't accept that her approach might not be the best one. She couldn't treat a guest with basic courtesy and respect. And Tom Hardy, to his credit, wasn't willing to sit there and take it. He tried to engage, tried to have a real conversation. And when that proved impossible, he left. The door closing behind Tom as he exited the studio was the final punctuation mark on a disaster of an interview. Behind that door, a talented actor who had come in good faith to talk about his work. On the other side, a host left to deal with the mess she had created, a confused audience, and a show in chaos. That's how it ended, with Tom Hardy walking away from The View and Joy Behar sitting at her table, probably realizing too late that she had gone too far.